Imagine a world so ancient that the memory of Eden still hung in the air like morning mist. This is the earth before the Great Flood, a time when humanity was only 7 generations removed from Adam himself. The soil was rich, the rivers ran wide, and the skies were impossibly clear. But beneath this pristine surface, something terrible was stirring. Something that would corrupt the very fabric of creation and force heaven itself to intervene. And at the center of this cosmic storm stood one man, a quiet scribe named Enoch. To understand Enoch, you first need to understand his bloodline. He was the son of Jared, the grandson of Mahalalel, and the great-great-great-great-grandson of Adam. In the book of Genesis, chapter 5, you'll find a long list of patriarchs, and almost every single entry ends the same grim way, and he died. But when you reach Enoch, the pattern shatters. The text says he lived 365 years, walked faithfully with God, and then he was simply no more, because God took him. The story begins not on earth, but in the highest reaches of heaven. According to the book of Enoch, God had stationed a group of 200 angels to watch over humanity from the celestial realm. These beings were called the Watchers, and their job was simple: observe, protect, and never interfere. They were beings of pure light, existing in a state of perfect obedience to the divine order. But as they gazed down at the world below, something began to shift inside them, something dangerous and irreversible. That elsewhere is a text so controversial and so explosive that it was banned from most Western Bibles for nearly 2,000 years. It's called the Book of Enoch, or First Enoch, and it was considered sacred scripture by the early Christians and the Jewish communities of the Second Temple period. Fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and to this day, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church includes it in their official biblical canon. What it contains is nothing short of a cosmic origin story for evil itself. The story begins not on earth, but in the highest reaches of heaven. According to the Book of Enoch, God had stationed a group of 200 angels to watch over humanity from the celestial realm. These beings were called the Watchers, and their job was simple: observe, protect, and never interfere. They were beings of pure light, existing in a state of perfect obedience to the divine order. But as they gazed down at the world below, something began to shift inside them, something dangerous and irreversible. The Watchers became obsessed with the daughters of men. They saw the beauty of human women and were consumed by a desire that was never meant to cross the boundary between heaven and earth. Their leader, a towering angel named Samyaza, knew exactly what they were contemplating was a catastrophic violation of cosmic law. So he made his followers swear a binding oath on the summit of Mount Hermon, pledging that if they were to be cursed for this act, they would all share the punishment together. Under the cover of a blood-red sky, the 200 Watchers descended from the heavens and landed on the peak of Mount Hermon. The moment their feet touched earthly soil, their celestial forms began to change. The pure light that radiated from their bodies dimmed, replaced by a heavy physical density they had never experienced before. They chose human wives from among the most beautiful women of the land, and in doing so, they shattered the sacred barrier that separated the divine from the mortal forever. But the corruption didn't stop at forbidden unions. The Watchers began sharing heavenly secrets with humanity, knowledge that mortals were never meant to possess. An angel named Azazel taught men how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, introducing the art of warfare to a world that had never known organized violence. He taught women how to use antimony and cosmetics to seduce and manipulate. Other Watchers revealed the secrets of astrology, sorcery, root-cutting enchantments, and the hidden signs of the heavens, plunging humanity into spiritual chaos. And then came the most horrifying consequence of all. The offspring of the Watchers and human women were not normal children. They were the Nephilim, towering giants of terrifying strength and insatiable hunger. Some ancient texts describe them as standing thousands of feet tall, though even more conservative estimates paint them as enormous, brutal warriors who towered over ordinary humans. The Nephilim devoured everything in their path: crops, livestock, wild animals, and eventually, when the food ran out, they turned on humanity itself, consuming human flesh and drinking blood. The earth became a nightmare. The gentle world that God had crafted in the days of creation was now drowning in violence, sorcery, and bloodshed. The Nephilim roamed the land like living natural disasters, crushing entire settlements beneath their feet. The forbidden knowledge spread by the Watchers had turned neighbor against neighbor, and the cries of the innocent rose up from the ground like smoke. The Book of Enoch says, "The earth itself cried out against the lawless ones, begging heaven for justice and deliverance from the horror below." High above the chaos, four great archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, looked down from heaven and saw the blood soaking the earth. They heard the wailing of the souls of the dead, the voices of those who had been slaughtered by the giants, and the violence of the fallen angels. Moved by compassion and righteous fury, the four archangels approached the throne of God and presented the case of suffering humanity, asking the Most High how much longer he would allow this abomination to continue unchecked. God's response was absolute and terrifying. He declared that the earth would be cleansed through a great deluge, a flood of water so massive it would wipe every trace of the Nephilim and their corruption from the face of the planet. He commanded the archangel Raphael to bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into a pit of jagged rocks in the desert of Dudael, covering him with darkness until the final day of judgment. And he ordered Michael to imprison Samyaza and the remaining Watchers. But before the judgment could be carried out, something extraordinary happened. The fallen Watchers, terrified of the divine wrath bearing down on them, realized they could not approach God's throne themselves. Their sin had severed their access to the heavenly court. So they did something no one expected. They sought out a human being to speak on their behalf. They searched the earth for the one man whose righteousness was so pure that his prayers could still reach the ears of the Almighty. They found Enoch. Picture this moment: the most powerful fallen angels in creation, beings who once stood in the direct presence of God, are now kneeling before a mortal man in a quiet valley, begging him for help. Samyaza, their leader, his once radiant face now twisted with guilt and fear, implored Enoch to write a petition of forgiveness and carry it to the throne of heaven. Enoch, despite knowing the magnitude of their crimes, agreed. He took up his reed pen and wrote down the words of the fallen, sealing their plea. Enoch traveled to the waters of Dan, a sacred site near Mount Hermon, and read the petition aloud under the stars. Then he fell into a deep, supernatural sleep, and his spirit was ripped from his body. What followed was a journey that no living human had ever experienced before. Enoch's consciousness was pulled upward through the layers of the cosmos, past the boundaries of the known universe, into realms of existence that defied all mortal comprehension. The Book of Enoch describes this ascent in staggering, vivid detail. First, Enoch was carried through a wall of fire so intense that it should have consumed him instantly, yet he passed through unharmed. Beyond the fire, he entered a vast house, built of crystals, with walls of hailstone and a floor of flowing water. The ceiling was a swirling canopy of stars and lightning, and the air itself hummed with a frequency that vibrated through his very soul. Inside this impossible structure, Enoch saw a second house, even larger than the first, and within it sat the throne of God. The throne was made of sapphire and surrounded by rivers of living fire. The great glory sat upon it, clothed in a garment brighter than the sun and whiter than any snow. No angel could approach this throne directly, and even the seraphim veiled their faces in its presence. Enoch, a mortal man, made of dust and breath, fell on his face in absolute terror, unable to look up or speak. The Book of Enoch says his entire body trembled and his vision blurred from the overwhelming radiance. Then the voice spoke. It didn't come from a mouth or a direction. It came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the fabric of reality itself. God called Enoch by name. telling him to rise and come closer. In a moment of staggering grace, the creator of the universe invited a human being to stand in the most sacred space in all of existence. Enoch rose to his feet, still trembling, and presented the petition of the watchers, reading aloud their desperate plea for mercy and forgiveness. The response was immediate and devastating. God told Enoch to go back and deliver a message to the watchers that would seal their fate for all eternity. He said, "You were spiritual beings, holy and eternal, living in the high heaven. You should have been petitioning on behalf of humanity, not the other way around. Instead, you defiled yourselves with the blood of women, fathered children of flesh, and brought destruction upon the very world you were created to protect. There will be no peace for you." God continued his decree, and every word was like a hammer blow to the foundations of the earth. He declared that the watchers would be forced to watch their giant sons slaughter each other before their very eyes, and they would be powerless to stop it. After the Nephilim were destroyed, the fallen angels would be bound in chains of iron and bronze beneath the hills of the earth, imprisoned in darkness for 70 generations until the final day of judgment, when they would be cast into eternal fire. But God's message wasn't only about punishment. He also revealed to Enoch the full scope of his plan for the earth. He showed Enoch a vision of the coming great flood, the cataclysm that would wash away every trace of the Nephilim's corruption and give humanity a second chance. He told Enoch that from his own family line, a righteous man named Noah would be chosen to survive the deluge and rebuild the world. Enoch was witnessing the blueprint of salvation centuries before the first raindrop fell. After delivering the verdict, God didn't simply send Enoch home. Instead, he took the scribe on a grand tour of the entire cosmos, revealing the hidden architecture of the universe. Guided by the archangels, Enoch traveled to the ends of the earth and beyond. He saw the storehouses of the winds, where the four corners of the sky were held in place by massive pillars. He witnessed the chambers where the sun and moon were kept when they were not crossing the sky, and the portals through which the stars emerged each night. Enoch was shown the prison of the fallen stars, angels who had disobeyed God's command to appear at their appointed times and were now chained in a place of burning fire at the edge of the universe. He saw the abyss of darkness where the souls of the wicked awaited judgment, a vast chasm of flame and shadow that made even the archangels hesitate at its edge. He visited the Garden of Righteousness, where the tree of life still grew, its fragrance filling the air with an unearthly sweetness. Perhaps the most chilling vision Enoch received was his tour of Sheol, the realm of the dead. He saw a massive mountain divided into 4 hollow compartments, each one designed to hold the spirits of the deceased until the day of judgment. The righteous dead rested in a place of light and flowing water, while the wicked were confined in darkness and torment, their cries echoing through the stone. Enoch was the first human being to see the afterlife and return to tell the tale. Enoch was also shown the cosmic calendar, the precise mathematical order governing the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. The Book of Enoch contains entire chapters dedicated to astronomical calculations that were remarkably advanced for the ancient world. Enoch learned that the universe operated on a divine schedule and that the chaos introduced by the Watchers had disrupted the natural order of the seasons and the heavens. His role as the heavenly scribe was to record these patterns so that future generations could restore the sacred rhythms of creation. After completing his cosmic journey, Enoch was returned to the earth to deliver God's final verdict to the Watchers. Imagine the weight of that moment. A mortal man, standing before 200 of the most powerful beings ever created, reading aloud their death sentence from the mouth of God himself. The Book of Enoch describes the fallen angels weeping and covering their faces when they heard the decree, knowing that their rebellion had sealed not only their own fate, but the fate of their monstrous offspring as well. The judgment was swift and merciless. The archangel Raphael seized Azazel, the angel who had introduced weapons and war to humanity, and hurled him into a jagged pit in the desert of Dudael. Rough, sharp stones were piled on top of him, and his face was covered in absolute darkness so that he would never see light again. The text says that on the great day of judgment, Azazel will be cast into the fire and the entire earth, which he taught to corrupt, will be healed of his influence. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel then descended upon the remaining watchers and bound them in chains of unbreakable celestial iron. The fallen angels were dragged beneath the surface of the earth and imprisoned in a subterranean labyrinth of fire and darkness, where they would remain until the end of time. Their giant sons, the Nephilim, were turned against one another in a frenzy of violence, slaughtering each other while their helpless fathers watched from their chains, unable to intervene or save the children they had created in defiance of heaven. With the Watchers imprisoned and the Nephilim destroyed, the stage was set for the final act of cleansing, the Great Flood. God instructed the archangels to heal the earth and restore the natural order that the fallen angels had disrupted. The waters of the deluge would wash away the blood, the sorcery, and the corruption, giving humanity a second chance. And at the heart of this new beginning would be Enoch's own great-grandson, Noah, the builder of the ark, the man who would carry the seed of life through the storm. With the Watchers imprisoned and the Nephilim destroyed, the stage was set for the final act of cleansing, the Great Flood. God instructed the archangels to heal the earth and restore the natural order that the fallen angels had disrupted. The waters of the deluge would wash away the blood, the sorcery, and the corruption, giving humanity a second chance. And at the heart of this new beginning would be Enoch's own great-grandson, Noah, the builder of the ark, the man who would carry the seed of life through the storm. But Enoch's story doesn't end with the flood. After delivering his prophecies and completing his cosmic missions, Enoch returned to his quiet life among his family. He continued to walk with God in a way that no other human being had ever achieved. The book of Genesis tells us that Enoch walked faithfully with God for 300 years after the birth of his son Methuselah. This wasn't a metaphor. Enoch lived in a state of constant, unbroken communion with the divine, his consciousness permanently attuned to the frequency of heaven. During these final years, Enoch wrote extensively, recording everything he had seen and heard during his journeys through the cosmos. The Book of Enoch contains his prophecies about the end of the world, the final judgment, the resurrection of the dead, and the ultimate triumph of righteousness over evil. He wrote about the coming of a messianic figure called the Son of Man, a passage that would later echo powerfully through the pages of the New Testament and shape early Christian theology in ways that scholars are still debating today. Enoch's influence on the New Testament is far greater than most people realize. The Epistle of Jude directly quotes the Book of Enoch, calling him a prophet who foretold the coming of the Lord with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon the ungodly. The Epistle to the Hebrews praises Enoch's faith, stating that he pleased God so completely that he was translated from this life without ever tasting death. Even the Book of Revelation contains imagery that scholars trace directly back to Enoch's ancient visions. So why was the Book of Enoch removed from most Western Bibles? The answer is complicated. By the 4th century, church leaders like Jerome and Augustine began questioning its authenticity, partly because of its detailed descriptions of angelic rebellion and its unconventional cosmology. The text was gradually excluded from the canonical lists of the Roman and Greek churches, though it remained hugely popular among ordinary Christians for centuries. It was essentially lost to the Western world until 1773, when the Scottish explorer James Bruce brought 3 Ethiopian manuscripts back to Europe. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1940s changed everything. Archaeologists found multiple fragments of the Book of Enoch among the scrolls, proving that it was widely read and deeply respected by the Jewish community at Qumran during the time of Jesus. Some scholars now argue that the Book of Enoch was one of the most influential texts in the entire Second Temple period, shaping the beliefs of the Essenes, the early Christians, and the authors of several New Testament books more than we ever previously understood. But let's return to Enoch's final moments on earth, because this is where his story transcends history and enters the realm of pure mysticism. According to the biblical account, when Enoch reached the age of 365, a number that mirrors the days of the solar year, something extraordinary happened. He was walking in his usual communion with God, when the boundary between the mortal and the divine simply dissolved. There was no death, no separation, no ending. He was taken. Later Jewish mystical traditions, particularly the text known as Third Enoch, or the Hebrew Book of Enoch, describe what happened next in breathtaking detail. According to these writings, when Enoch was taken up to heaven, his mortal body was transformed into pure celestial fire. His flesh became flame, his veins became rivers of light, and his eyes became blazing torches that could see to the ends of the universe. He was given 72 wings and 365,000 eyes, and he was seated on a throne beside the divine presence. Enoch was given a new name, Metatron, the Prince of the Presence, the supreme archangel, and the celestial scribe of God. In this exalted role, Metatron became the intermediary between the infinite creator and the finite creation, recording the deeds of every human being in the heavenly books and guiding the souls of the righteous through the corridors of paradise. He was described as the Lesser YHWH, a title so controversial that it sparked intense theological debates among Jewish scholars for centuries about the nature of divine authority. The transformation of Enoch into Metatron represents one of the most radical ideas in all of religious literature. The notion that a human being could ascend to the highest ranks of the angelic hierarchy and sit at the right hand of God. It suggests that the boundary between humanity and divinity is not as fixed as we might think, and that the ultimate destiny of the righteous is not merely to serve God from a distance, but to participate directly in the governance of the cosmos itself. Enoch's legacy extends far beyond the pages of ancient scripture. His story has influenced countless works of art, literature, and theology over the past 3,000 years. The Renaissance painter William Blake created stunning illustrations of Enoch's visions. The poet John Milton drew heavily in the Watcher narrative when writing Paradise Lost. Modern fantasy authors, filmmakers, and game designers continue to mine the Book of Enoch for its rich imagery of fallen angels, cosmic warfare, and apocalyptic prophecy, proving that this ancient text still resonates with extraordinary power. The story of Enoch also raises profound questions about the nature of forbidden knowledge. The Watchers were punished not for knowing the secrets of the cosmos, but for sharing them with humanity, before we were ready to handle them. The weapons, the sorcery, the vanity, and the manipulation that Azazel introduced were not inherently evil in the hands of angels. But in the hands of flawed, mortal beings, they became instruments of destruction. It's a cautionary tale that feels eerily relevant in our own age of technological acceleration. Enoch's journey through the cosmos also anticipates modern scientific discoveries in surprising ways. His descriptions of the structure of the universe, the movements of celestial bodies, and the vast emptiness beyond the stars mirror concepts that astronomers would not formally articulate for thousands of years. Whether you view these passages as divine revelation, ancient intuition, or allegorical poetry, the sheer scope of Enoch's cosmic vision is staggering, and it challenges the assumption that ancient people had a simplistic or naive understanding of the universe they inhabited. At its core, the story of Enoch is about the power of righteousness in a world consumed by chaos. While the Watchers fell, the Nephilim raged, and humanity spiraled into violence and corruption, one man maintained an unbroken connection with the divine. Enoch didn't fight the giants with swords or challenge the fallen angels with armies. He fought with faith, with prayer, and with the quiet, relentless discipline of walking with God every single day of his life. And that faithfulness earned him a destiny that no other mortal has ever achieved. The Book of Enoch reminds us that the ancient world was far stranger, far more complex, and far more spiritually charged than the sanitized versions of biblical history we often encounter. It's a world where angels rebel, giants roam the earth, the cosmos is a living architecture of fire and ice, and a single human being can stand before the throne of God and speak on behalf of the entire creation. It challenges us to expand our imagination and take seriously the spiritual realities that our ancestors considered self-evident. If there's one takeaway from the story of Enoch, it's this. The boundary between the seen and the unseen is thinner than we think. The ancient scribes who preserved these texts believed that the spiritual realm was not a distant abstraction, but a living, breathing reality that intersected with the physical world at every point. Enoch walked that boundary for 365 years, and in the end, he crossed it completely, leaving behind a legacy of prophecy, mystery, and wonder that continues to captivate us to this very day. So the next time you read that brief, enigmatic passage in Genesis about the man who walked with God and was no more, remember the epic that lies behind those few words. Remember the fallen angels on Mount Hermon, the giants devouring the earth, the throne room of sapphire and fire, and the quiet scribe who dared to carry the prayers of the damned to the feet of the Almighty. Enoch's story is far from over. In many ways, it's only just beginning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.